Hello, and welcome to the 2-Bit Game Club. I'm your host, Liam Gallagher, and with me, as always, is Brooke Jensen. Say hi, Brooke.
Hey, everyone.
What are we talking about this week, Brooke?
Deus Ex.
Oh, man. Which Deus Ex?
The first one, the original one, before it got HD.
Right. This is standard definition Deus Ex from the year 2004. I guess it was PC. It got ported to Mac as well as the PlayStation 2.
Right, yeah. I have the Game of the Year edition, so I don't know what that means.
Goaty.
Oh.
All right. So, before we get on to talking about that game, let's talk about the game for next month. What are we playing, Brooke?
Banjo-Kazooie.
Oh, yeah. The 1998 classic for the N64.
I actually have no idea what it is.
Okay, well, you're in for...
Don't tell me.
You're in for a delight and a surprise and maybe a shock. All right, so we're going to be right back with the show. So, this month we played Deus Ex from the year 2000. It's a game that's spun off a series that's still going on. The franchise is strong as ever. What were your first impressions of this game, Brooke?
It was definitely old. And the faces, Liam. And the faces.
So you're saying high poly.
Surprisingly, I got used to that quickly. But, it certainly tried to do a lot with a little.
Yeah. I mean, it's low poly before low poly was cool, right? It's when low poly was mandatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. I played this game back in 2000, and my memory of it held up pretty good. I think I came away feeling less fantastic about it than I did, but only by a very small margin.
Interesting. Right, because I've never played this game before, like either long in the past when it originally was conceived or any time recently. I actually played the prequel, like, new game, Human Revolution, long before I played this one.
Right. So, before we get into, mincing words and trying to figure out what this game's about, can you give a brief overview, like a synopsis, for somebody who has not played Deus Ex 2000?
Okay, so you're a dude in a trench coat and sunglasses, and you've just been hired you've just been put into UNATCO, which is a UN peacekeeping force, quote, peacekeeping force. And you're sent in to kill terrorists who are hijacking shipments of medicine, probably because they're evil or something. And you got a lot of weapons, you got a bunch of skills, and you got a whole bunch of chips in your brain that let you lift boxes.
And that's the game.
And that's the whole game. But yeah, it's like a cyberpunk game with a lot of the kind of typical cyberpunk sort of themes, capitalism, government, technology, the intersection of the three. And essentially you're navigating this conspiracy of various government organizations and insurgent groups.
Yeah, figuring out what your place as a transhuman who's been augmented by nanomachines.
And trench coats.
And trench coats and sunglasses and smugness. And what your place is going to be in the New World Order.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that's a pretty good synopsis. And basically, when everything shakes out, you need to make a choice about whether or not the Illuminati, superhuman Bob Page, or you and a rogue AI are going to control the world.
Yeah, and it's only those three.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a pretty wide spectrum, all things considered. I guess one of the options is that the world decays into a state of, like, no global communication and becomes like ancient Greece in terms of, like, no, only regional government.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the only three. I don't think you can pick Bob Page. I mean, I guess if you just jump off a railing and die, that's the equivalent of picking Bob Page.
If you don't finish the game, Bob Page wins.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start to get into it. What are your impressions of this? What are the things that are pressing the pulse that you think people need to know about Deus Ex?
Um, I think I didn't play a lot of games at the time, but definitely in terms of like narrative depth and maybe not necessarily all the writing. I mean, sometimes it's hard to tell if like there's writing problems or voice acting problems in the game, but definitely in terms of like the themes, even when it gets heavy-handed, that the game was trying to handle at the time, at least to my knowledge, nothing else in its realm of gaming was doing that. So I think that's pretty important, and like the fact that you can go through the whole game not killing anybody was a big deal.
Yeah.
Um,
So to kind of put it in context, this game is built on the Unreal Engine, and for all intents and purposes, it looks like Unreal Tournament. So that's probably like, in terms of the graphical fidelity and the textures, what people can think of. And it is a first-person shooty type game, but it also has a lot of stealth and sort of like choose your own adventure, diplomacy, story path stuff, which is interesting to see draped on top of the Unreal Engine.
yeah, because I think some of the other games that would have been out around the same time in the same era, I guess, would have been like Thief, which was purely a stealth game. Um, I think you could kill people, but it was very hard. But this was interesting because it encouraged you, or like it put you in a lot of positions where the people you were shooting generally weren't really bad people.
Mm-hmm.
They may have been doing bad things, but they may just like, I mean, like, because you're shooting terrorists at the beginning, but they make it pretty clear pretty quickly that like, they're not all that, they're not like blowing up buildings or anything. They're like stealing uh, a cure to a disease. They can distribute it to people, and then later you're fighting like government troops and military who are just like following orders because they were told that you're a terrorist now. So there's no one really you're killing in this game that you can feel all too good about, except maybe like some of the big named characters.
Bob Page.
Bob Page, yeah.
Yeah, he just wants to be like the God King of the world.
Yeah, I really liked right from the get-go, I really liked the fact that when you're walking around on Liberty Island, and like I was kind of sneaking around and I could hear a lot of like terrorist troops talking. And a lot of them were just talking about stuff that had nothing to do with what was going on. Or like only tangentially related to what was going on, or just like complaining about their life, or just like some of them being like scared that someone was going to kill them. Or like whether or not they're like doing the right thing, which made me feel really bad about killing them pretty quickly.
Right. It's interesting because I, as I said, that I played Deus Ex when it came out back in 2000. So when we picked up this game to do it for the 2-Bit Game Club, I picked up the port for the PlayStation 2. And one of the things that was really interesting and revealing to me about that is I don't know if it was a technical issue or if there was a disk space limitation. A lot of that banter was taken out of the game.
Oh, wow.
And it really, really deeply affected the experience because the levels just became, trapezoids filled with mooks that are in your way, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that was interesting about it is that, and we'll get into this later, but I think the game is really not very good looking.
Mm-hmm.
But I was amazed by how much of the horrible low poly, awful texture, bad lighting I was able to ignore when my environment was filled with, real feeling people who had conversations with, with well voice acted, well written lines, and how much I was able to like forgive the problems with their AI, where like they constantly run into walls and do silly stuff and don't quite react like humans do.
Yeah.
Because, at least a veneer had been placed over top of those interactions. But stripped away in the PlayStation port, it was just like I was playing a really bad version of GoldenEye.
Because there's a lot that kind of makes them act like people, even when like the pathfinding screws up. Like for instance, especially with a lot of terrorists in the beginning, they generally didn't like shoot you on sight. They kind of freaked out and ran towards an alarm to get backup. And a lot of enemies do this in general, like they wouldn't fight you to the death if they had an option to find people to help them.
Yeah.
Which felt like real people as opposed to just like sitting around shooting you until you kill them, even if you're winning. Yeah, the banter did that too. The fact that you could kind of find random civilians in the combat zone and just sort of like talk to them, and generally like they try to help you out.
Yeah, somebody kill me, please.
Although sometimes I did find the enemy AI to kind of break me out of it when they did something especially silly, like just run into a wall repeatedly or stuff like that.
Yeah, I think this becomes a theme for the whole game, where as you're talking about like for the era, what it was trying to do and the new things it introduced and the type of storytelling that it brought to the fore that we haven't seen before in video games was sort of magnificent. But in a lot of ways, the finer details of the execution of the game kind of hold it back.
Yeah, like there's a scene in Hell's Kitchen where there was I guess it was a pimp and drug dealer who was like talking to some woman, and I was just watching him with a sniper rifle, and then he like pulled out a gun to shoot her, so I just shot him in the head. But because of how like the friendly foe system worked in the game and like the allegiance AI worked, by me shooting this guy, all the police in the area came after me to murder me.
Right.
Even though I just killed a guy who pulled a gun out on an innocent person.
Right, yeah. There's some clunkiness.
Yeah.
Yeah, like enemies running into walls, or like the pathfinding screwing up when an enemy decides that it wants to break for it because they're done with fighting, and they just, find a corner and get stuck on it and like shudder a bit and then eventually like just stand still.
Yeah, or like another time I was in Maggie Chow's house, and like I accidentally walked on top of a cat, and then it like it hurt the cat, and then like everyone freaked out.
Oh no, because the cat was their ally.
Because the cat was their ally, and I guess the cat was not very good at moving out of the way. I actually killed a cat in the game by accident because I walked on it because I couldn't see it, and then I just died. It was horrible.
So like one of the things that you talked about the game's similarity to Thief. Another touchstone I think is System Shock 2. And one of the threads that bind those things together is that Warren Spector, who's the director on this game, worked on all three of those titles. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading an interview with him, and one of the things that he said is that for this game they wanted to establish firm rules with the player about what kind of game that they're playing. And so I can see the stepping on a cat being a sensible part of that design, in fact, because if you think about it in terms of you in your everyday life, right? Say I had a cat.
Okay.
And I invited you to my house, and then while you were in my house, you stepped on my cat's spine and crushed it.
So you would take out your 9mm pistol.
Were I the leader of a gang? I might, yeah.
Okay.
Were I the leader of an international crime syndicate? I think that's the kind of thing I'd be willing to do.
Okay, yeah. I mean that's fair. I think the part where like the police murder you without question when you shoot someone who's about to shoot someone else might not be so much, but I don't know. Maybe the police in the game. Well, I mean, maybe you could argue that the police in the game are just like don't have any patience for anything because everywhere is pretty much under martial law.
Yeah. Or they're like they have mooktacularitis, or they just don't know what's happening. And I think it can be too easy to practice like apologetics for these kinds of things, like interpret glitches as being design features.
Yeah.
But I think in general, the game is pretty faithful for that kind of approach, where it expects a little bit more of the player in terms of like their in-game conduct than you would with like Super Mario, right?
Yeah.
No one's gonna be like, Mario, you just killed all these turtles. What is wrong?
There was some good stuff for that. Like I think if you like when you went to Maggie Chow's house, they're like, yeah, like hang out, like check out our living room. But like I'm innocent, go look in the police station. If you just like start wandering around her house and like hacking into her computers and like snooping around, her maid just tries to murder you. Without very much warning. Like she just kind of comes up behind you and starts shooting you.
Tries to assassinate you.
Yeah. And so some cool stuff like that. Also, like there's a scene where I was going up to my helicopter on the top of like the Illuminati base or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a dead mechanic, which was confusing because it was not a hostile area. And then I walked over to the mechanic who wasn't dead, and they were like, hello, I'm a mechanic. So I tried to question him because I thought maybe like, if I just talked to him, I would figure out he was evil. But he's just like, nope, I'm just a mechanic. So I didn't know what to do, so I just stunned him in the face. And and then I looted his body, and that still didn't make it clear what was going on. So I started exploring the base and talking to people. And when I talked to one person, they mentioned like the mechanic was French, and I was like, but he had an American accent.
Right.
And then you talk to them, and then you tell them that you already like stunned them, and then if you do all that, then your helicopter pod finds that there's a bomb in the helicopter.
Yeah. Also, if you actually just kill the mechanic when you loot his body, you find a silenced pistol on him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I must miss that.
Yeah, there's lots of little details like that. Like when you first go into UNATCO headquarters, they say like go see Manderley right away. Manderley is the leader of UNATCO, but you can just go explore their offices, and you can go into the women's washroom, and then you whatever, right? But then you go have your meeting with Manderley, and you go through all the stuff, and he says, here's your reward, we're going to pay you this much, your next assignment is blah blah blah. And then as you go to leave the room, he goes, oh, and Denton, by the way, don't go into the women's washroom again. It reflects badly on the organization, even if you don't seem to care.
Wow. Yeah, there is. Yeah, I noticed there's a lot of like cool little like side things, and a lot of times, like if I didn't know what was going on, I would just like I got all the hacking upgrades. So I just started hacking all the computers, just trying to read every email to figure out like who the hell was actually working with who. And what was going on. I'm trying to think of another good example.
There's one where when you're in the subway system, there's a drug dealer who's trying to sell this drug in the game called Zyme. And you can just be like aggressive and get into a fight with him and just kill him just because you're like, to hell with you, drug dealer. And then later you have to go talk to some other guy who like wants him off his turf, and the interaction goes differently if you've already killed him ahead of time. So it's not just like the guy says his thing and then blah 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 blah, and then afterwards they clip in some dialogue where he says, I've already killed him after the fact, right? The whole dialogue actually goes completely differently.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that where like you could do stuff in pretty much any order, and the game would sort of respond to that properly. If you like happen to kill someone or take care of a plot before you even learned that the plot was happening because you just happened to like stumble into it.
Yeah. But then you end up with some missteps in this sequence where you remember the window sequence where you discover your brother has been shot up in a hotel room, right?
Oh yeah, I was telling you about this. And like I went through all the work to make sure my brother did not die, escorted him to the front doors of the building, he left, and then I walked out the window instead because I didn't want to go out the front door because it was like bad news out there. And then the game just assumed I'd let him die because I walked out the window instead of the front door.
Right, because prior he says, just get to the roof and get to the chopper. Don't worry about me. I can take care of myself.
Yeah.
And so no matter when you go through the window, if you go through the window, the game follows that like decision making tree.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a few things like that, but otherwise, I thought it was surprisingly detailed in terms of like them planning out like all the different things that you could have done. And
Yeah.
that's interesting, like the choice in this game, because there isn't actually a lot of like when we talk about choice in specifically in a story context now, this game doesn't have a lot of that because now like the big buzzwords about RPGs are choice and consequence in the context of like you get to pick like endings to things,
Yeah.
and like unique story branches kind of deal. Where this Deus Ex game really had very little of that. Like you get to pick an ending, but other than that, most of the quests kind of have like a set story. You just may encounter that story in different ways.
Yeah, depending on the route you choose to take through it. And there are like discrete decisions you can make along the way. Like, say there's a conflict with. So, like in this game, you're a nano augmented super weapon government agent, and you have a cloned twin brother who is also that. And he goes rogue. And some of the older generation augmented agents who are augmented with like hydraulics and like steel implants are still kicking around on the force. And so you end up in a scenario where you're at an aircraft hangar and the leader of the NSF, which is the terrorist group you encounter earlier in the game, is on the plane. And he's like, listen, buddy, you know, this gray death disease is actually nanomachines killing people that the government has made. And the vaccine's not a vaccine. It's like a password that you put into your bloodstream to turn them off. You know, you've been on the wrong side the whole time. Like, go out there and kill Anna Navarra, who's one of these like steel augmented, I don't know, super agents. And then in that encounter, you can either kill her or not kill her, and that can lead to either the terrorist guy dying or not dying, and which has a pretty major impact upon like the moral or ethical standing of your character's behavior. But it doesn't end up affecting the plot either way, right? Because both of those characters, whether they live or die, sort of exit the narrative at that point anyways. Like, he gets on a plane if he's still alive and basically just fucks right off. He's like, this conflict has come way outside of the scope of my organization. I'm out of here. And then with Navarra, they end up like basically benching her for being a violent sociopath if she lives.
So yeah, that kind of speaks to my point where like it's the way that the game treats choice is different than a lot of games try to cheat choice right now, where the focus on like people, like if you look on like Reddit threads about modern RPGs, a lot of people talking about them wanting to have choices that matter, but in Deus Ex, a lot of the choices, as you kind of pointed out, don't, quote, matter in the sense that, like, characters exit the narrative regardless, or, like, even if they live, their impact on the rest of the game is small. But they do, like, as you kind of point out in your comment, that they do matter heavily to you and, like, how you experience the narrative. Like, whether Paul lives or dies doesn't matter because, like, all he does is, like, make comments a few times throughout the game. But, like, it influences the way that you see your relationship with that character, whether or not you let him die. But so the choice matters, but like in a lot of the way we've become obsessed with now, the choice doesn't matter. And this game doesn't seem to like care that much about that. Yeah. It's just trying to make interesting like situations that allow you to like, I don't know, have a personalized experience with the game that reflects how you feel and doesn't really concern itself with like making 15 different like distinct branches in the plot that are completely different.
Where all the side characters' haircuts are correct according to the narrative choices you made.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is something that I want to dig into based on this game, is whether or not you think that the exchange for like that kind of control over plot arcs to the player is worth the trade in having a writer lose control of the narrative?
Uh, the
I know it's a bit of a slippery way to frame it, and I'm not trying to be like a weasel about it.
Yeah.
But like, let me back over it then. So
Okay.
like, you take like a Shakespearean play, for example.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's I think is magnificent about something like Macbeth or like I don't know, or Richard V is, but My Kingdom for a Horse. That moment feels inevitable when it takes place. It feels like the story could have gone many different ways, but in that moment, that's the only one that could possibly make sense, and you have this like fantastic dramatic conclusion, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like in a choose your own adventure kind of situation, which most video games, even when they're heavily scripted, are, right? Like even if you take something like I don't know, Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, right? It's kind of choose your own adventure because you can do a bunch of stuff in between the story points, even though you have to do the temples in a very particular order, right? Do you think that okay, and then that would put a game with like multiple endings, like I understand like Dragon Age games are kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I would say, then on the very, very far extreme side of the choose your own adventure thing. Do you think that the compromise, or do you think not compromise, do you think what we're giving up in terms of control over the story we're telling to the player is worth the trade from taking it away from the writer's ability to craft a narrative?
I think it's tricky. I think this is both reflecting on my own experiences, like trying to do writing for games, and also like games that I've played that I've liked. Is that like, I mean, a lot of writers who don't do interactive stuff talk about, giving up like control to the player. But I think the way you have to view it is more that like the writer and the game designers are crafting like a space for a story to happen, and through like the shape of that space they can bring about a lot of interesting dramatic and thematic aspects, but like you have to do that very carefully. Like Hamlet, if Hamlet was like a choose your own adventure book, and at the end you just Hamlet just chose to like fuck off and not deal with any of this nonsense anymore.
He went on vacation.
Yeah, like it would make the whole interesting aspect of Hamlet's character like completely mute,
Right.
or completely moot. So I think it's about more what they like kind of let you do, and like they can have those interesting dramatic aspects through like limited choices, but like very specific choices that still.
This is something that I think that this game excelled at, because
Okay.
I feel like it cuts the difference pretty fantastically, right? Because the storyline is still well crafted, and the writer has a ton of control over what's actually going to happen, because your choices don't necessarily affect the way that the game plays out. Your choices affect the way that you feel about the way the plot plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the writer was Sheldon Picotti. He's a novelist, and he's also done some other independent stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I like another game I played was like a modern game was like Firewatch, and that's another game where like you play as like a dude in a forest watching for fires, and the plot kind of always plays out the same way, kind of like this. But through the whole game, you're like on a walkie-talkie talking to this other woman who you never meet, who's like another like Firewatch person in the park. And you make a lot of choices about like the nature of that relationship, and that like influences your like how you feel about being in this park. but like you never, there's not like 8,000 paths. There's like a very clear arc to the story and like themes to the story, but you still get to like explore inside those themes, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Where like if Hamlet chose to just fuck off, that wouldn't really be a choice inside the themes of the game.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like one of the things I resist the notion of is that games that don't have writing don't have story, right? Like a Grand Prix in Mario Kart has a story, right?
Yeah.
You and your friends, competing, test of wits, whatever, right? And that plays out a narrative of its own.
yes. Yeah, I agree.
So like in that way, like Mario Kart has just as much of the story as say like a Dragon Age game does. But really what's happening is that we're using the word story in multiple senses. We're using the word story to describe different things that are actually happening in the game. Because Mario Kart and Dragon Age both have stories. But I think when we're talking about diverging paths and having control over the story, we're saying something different.
Yeah, I think the word story in games, I mean, this is why like people have stopped liking the word like ludonarrative dissonance, which is supposed to mean like when the gameplay and the story kind of have opposing ideas or like they don't like actually work together. People have A lot of academics have stopped using it because it tries to divide like a game into the interactive part and like the story part, or like the game part, I guess, and the story part, which doesn't really make sense because, as you said, like, Mario Kart has a story, and it's not just like we put a bunch of people in carts.
And that's the story of karting.
It's the story that whatever. I don't know if Mario Kart even has like this like illusion that like there's some reason that all these people are in carts. I think they just are.
Yeah, they skip it with Mario Kart, but for some reason in like Mario Golf or Mario Tennis, there's always like an opening cinematic where like the princess invites everybody over for like a round of doubles or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that I like spent a lot of time hacking computers is part of the story, even though like a writer didn't write it. That was the narrative of my experience going through the game, is I spent a lot of time hacking into people's computers.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting about the design of the levels and the scenarios is, as well as having choice over like narratively, like ethically, where your character stands. There's a lot of RPG elements in this game that maybe we can spend some time talking about.
Sure.
That are blended, I think, very successfully in with the first-person shooting. That let you choose skills and feats and perks or whatnot in a pretty D&D type way, right? Like when you boot up the game, there's a really long and fun cinematic that I really like. We've got that up on the Facebook page for 2-Bit Game Club, facebook.com/2-Bit Game Club. But after that, you get a character sheet and you name your dude and you pick your points and you decide what kind of character you want to be, whether you want to invest in hacking or like stealth weapons or long range rifles. And then as you go throughout the levels, you oftentimes have very different approaches that you can take to overcoming the problem. You spoke before about having the possibility of going through the entire game without killing somebody, which is definitely something. Or you can play the game in the other way, which is just like a bruiser with a rocket launcher, just like decimating everything you come across. Or you can blend the styles, which is how I played it. Doing a little bit of both, until like doing stealth until it went wrong, and then icing everybody. But more than just being a matter of whether or not you're choosing to engage in combat or engage in stealth, they do a good job of presenting it so that it's not like there's a right-hand corridor and a left-hand corridor, and if you go right, you have to kill everybody, and if you go left, you have to sneak by everybody. There's multiple solutions to what is, I think, one well-blended scenario.
Yeah, generally, if you just wander around the levels kind of lost, like I usually did, you can find like a way to do the thing like pretty much any way, except for a few rare cases where there wasn't, and it was really frustrating. Like generally, if you wandered around, you'd find a grate, and maybe it was locked, or like you'd find a keypad that you needed to hack, or if you didn't have any hacking tools, you could wander around and you'd find the combination hidden somewhere behind a locker, maybe that you could just hit with a crowbar. Like so, if you just like it's they did that really well, I found, in like 99% of the cases where like wandering around, you both got a story of the place because like all the locations, like their layout made sense and people were kind of where they were, you'd like expect them to be. And like if there was like, a standing like military on site, like there'd be a barracks where all their stuff would be. And there'd probably be an armory where you could find weapons if you were running low on weapons. Or, if you needed hacking tools or something, there might be a computer lab if, like, this is a research station where you could find that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and all the time while you were snooping around, people were having conversations more or less about what they were doing, which makes sense, right? So you get an idea of what's actually happening in that space, right? You're in an armory, and you hear soldiers talking about how they're on duty and it's a pain in the ass, and they don't know why they're guarding all these scientists. It doesn't make sense. They're supposed to be UNATCO troops. They're supposed to be peacekeepers. Why are we at a medical research lab?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you'd overhear like clues, like in one of the later areas, like I couldn't find the combination for a keypad that couldn't be hacked. I was just wandering around, and one of the like Men in Black things was arguing with a mechanic over like key combinations, and he's like, I don't know anything about key combinations, like Jacob or whatever his name was does. And then a little bit earlier I'd found a keypad signed Jacob where he said, yo, I gotta go, I'll be in the reactor lab. So I just used the map to find the reactor lab, and I found Jacob or whatever, and I talked to him, and he gave me the key code.
Yeah, rather than being like, where is Jacob? I need a keypad, he's in the reactor.
Yeah, exactly. So like you can kind of collate information from different sources. And generally if I was lost hacking into things and reading emails or like looking for data pads would generally give me a pretty good idea about what was going on and where everything was.
Yeah. Or you can just blow people up and take their nano keys off their ring.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So we talked about the Men in Black there briefly. So what do you think about the actual content of the story? We've talked about the presentation of it.
Okay.
But what do you... So as a little bit of a primer... One of the things that I really like about this game, and you can give me your perspective on it, is how it takes like the existing, let's call it like the mythos of, 21st century conspiracy theories. I guess it would have been 20th at the time. Oh, I guess 21st because year 2000. Anyhow, and weaves them together into a pretty hilarious but actually like cogent story. So you have like Men in Black, you have Majestic 12. Secret science organization. You have the aliens at Roswell and Area 51. You have the black helicopters. You have a government manufactured super virus. You have like nanite technologies. You have like medical experiments to create like super freak monsters. You have all this kind of stuff braided together into like one big plot. What did you think of the actual content of it?
I thought it was good by and large. I thought that it definitely didn't feel like, because I've read some like conspiracy fiction. Like I was just reading I've just been reading a bunch of Black Widow comics recently, and usually like there's some like massive spy organizations at work in like every plot arc that she's in. And like a lot of times it just starts to feel like they're just throwing names at me of various things, and then like eventually it resolves, but I never really understood it enough to like even start to think and wonder what was going on. Whereas in this game, like you're introduced to things. I think as you said, it weaves them all pretty well because you're introduced to things pretty slowly. And then generally you're given like a slight clue of the next thing, and then you see some stuff with it. And then you're given a slight clue to the next thing, and you see some stuff with it. So I never felt confused. I never got like lost as to who all these people were. Like it always made 100% sense to me, which is unique when I usually read this kind of fiction.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of. It's definitely like in the realm of pulp, but it seems to take like the pulp premises and do something more substantive with them. But then at the end of the game, you are trying to prevent a nano augmented superhuman Bob Page from merging with the singularity while fighting through a dark matter reactor guarded by gray aliens in
Yeah.
Area 51, which is run by Majestic 12.
Yeah. I to be honest, I was kind of on board with everything until the aliens. The aliens were kind of like too much for me.
that was that was the big ask.
Because they were, well, because like everything else was like woven together so well, and then after it was just like there's aliens, and the only reason I could tell for why there was aliens was because it was Area 51, and
Yeah.
that's where
You think that was
aliens are.
one too many spices in the gumbo?
Yeah, and they didn't really contribute to the plot at all. Like it's
You
not
got
like,
to you got to hit them with a laser sword.
yeah, I mean, I guess. Well, I mean, I hate the aliens for two reasons. One is because I found them annoying as hell to fight, but the other is just like, yeah, they weren't involved in the plot. They were just kind of there to be there. The But I think that it did, by and large, it did a good job of portraying like the cyberpunk genre in a game. Like the game had some like pretty weighty ideas about like governance, um, especially parts where it like questioned whether or not like the democracies held up by the West are actually better than like more authoritarian governments in like the East, um, which I'm guessing would not be a popular acclaim in a lot of places where this game would be sold. At least not the mainstream like opinion, because it pretty much takes everything to the extreme, or not extreme, but inevitable conclusion of like shrinking governments in a time when like corporations get more and more power,
Yes.
which I thought was pretty cool. I think, and this kind of brings into like a lot of thoughts I have on comparing this game to Human Revolution, which is uh, the new game that kind of like, it's a prequel, but they kind of play fast and loose with the lore. Where like in this game, it has all these ideas about like sort of the systems of capitalism and governance, but in the end, kind of reduces it to all the problems to like kind of these individuals who are manipulating everything. Whereas in the new Deus Ex, how to put this, a lot of the plot and conflict has more to do with like the way the systems influence people and less about agents being evil.
Right.
Where this game had like a lot of like evil people.
Yeah, like every faction was associated with a person that you would interact with in the game. So I mean, I think it's pretty clearly laid out by the sets of choices you have at the end. So you have Everett, who's running the Illuminati now that Bob Page has sort of broken their triumvirate or whatnot, and he wants you to help him bring back Illuminati control, the unseen hand governing global capitalism, to allow democracies to still function, but with like the oversight of like a benevolent manipulator.
Yeah.
And then there's the singularity where it's Dalius, right? Or I forget which one it is at the
Helios.
end. Helios, yeah. Helios is an AI that is merged with several other AIs, and it wants you to allow it into your nano augmented computer brain so that you can like make flesh an impartial AI that can govern the world, independent of human greed and malice. Basically saying that transhumanism has altered the like human experience to the extent that humanity has power beyond its decision-making ability, and so it needs to be ruled by an impartial auditor, basically. And then there's the Bob Page ending, which we talked about, which is where Bob Page goes crazy and tries to build Aquinas' city on the hill and be the god king of the universe. And then there's one more where, Tracer Tong, who is the leader of the Triads, and I guess there's like a coalition between the Triads and some other gang out east. And what he wants you to do is basically just like shut the internet down so that existence can crumble into disassociated, unnetworked city-states where humanity can be governed on a scale that the people who are doing the governing can actually have a comprehension of. So to trade the technological advances of the modern era for something that's actually more fitting of like having an ambition fitting the capacity of an actual human mind.
Yeah, exactly. So like governments, I think is exactly what I was thinking. Like, so governments are small enough so that their citizens can comprehend them. And there's like in the main plot about the virus was pretty much about like manufacturing this false supply and demand of like cure to a virus that everyone needs, but not actually producing very much to gain power. Whereas in the newer Deus Ex, there's also a thing where like everyone in the new Deus Ex, like a lot of the population is augmented, and there's like an anti-rejection drug that you need to take if you have augmentations, but it costs money, and so as a result, like it creates this whole new wave of like poverty for people, or like it kind of like enhances the wage divide, like augmentations. But it's not so much someone doing it as like a conspiracy to gain power. It's more just like an inevitable consequence of like the system of capitalism and like augmentation. Does that make sense? So that's kind of like where I see like, I don't know if that has anything to do with like changing thoughts about like how we look at the world, but like there seems to be less like in the new Deus Ex, despite having a lot of the same plot elements, there seems to be less of like there are boogeymen out there and more just like the systems are themselves just creators of evil.
Yeah, I think that like there's I think that's the conceit of this game, if that makes sense. That were it to really happen, could it really happen? If you really had to kill gray aliens with a lightning sword.
Yeah.
It probably would not be as simple as it's portrayed in Deus Ex 2000, because it is unlikely that the world's conflicts would really be dictated by the actions of 4 people. They really just wouldn't even have enough time on their hands to do it, right?
Yeah.
But for the purposes of this play, right, like those ideas and stakeholders in the world are sort of represented by those 4 personalities so that you can interact with them on a human level.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair point. The as opposed like kind of personifying the different aspects into people.
And I guess that's, as I say, it's like that's the narrative conceit, right? Like, and whether or not like as you're saying, like the gray aliens were too much, it was too big of an ask. That's where it like broke your suspension of disbelief. I guess whether or not you're willing to see those characters as a representation of ideals is another ask that this game has for you.
Right, yeah. Which is fair enough. I was just sort of like calling attention to the fact that the more modern game seems to like do that a bit differently. Though still having, I guess, some personalities for that. It does sort of somewhat just portray those systems without them. But there's also a lot of other differences that I noticed in these 2 games in terms of like gameplay. Some of them I think are just evolutions of like, are just natural evolutions of like people figuring out what makes good games. Like in the new game, you have like a cover system so you can actually get behind stuff, as opposed to one thing I always found weird in this game was just JC Denton like crouching behind stuff.
Yeah.
Because I just try to visualize him in like third person, just like crouched behind a box, but no one notices him.
Yeah. One of the systems that this game really inherits it inherits is the use of lighting from the Thief games.
Yeah.
Right, so the game is advanced enough that we have like tactical placement of objects and you're hiding and whatnot, but I don't think it's not calculating sight lines, right? It's figuring out how much noise you're making, and whether or not you're in the lit areas, right? And at times, yeah, it does feel pretty hokey, because you can be trailing people like 5 feet behind them, but so long as you're in the dark, they can't see you.
Yeah. Whereas in like the modern one, like people have sight lines, you can actually get into cover and you can sort of move around and you look like a person would look if you were actually trying to hide.
Yeah.
Kind of deal. One thing that is very different is how the two games handled bosses, where I don't think, except for maybe the end, I don't think the original Deus Ex really even had bosses.
No, everybody you can just sort of hit with a rocket and they're dead.
Yeah, and like a lot of the bosses, like Walter Simmons and like
Walter Simmons, right? Like he's got his weird choked voice.
Yeah, and what was that guy's name? The German guy.
Oh, Gunther.
Gunther, yeah. Like both of them, like originally I ran into them, and they have this like cutscene with you where they say like, "I'm going to kill you now," and then they usually killed me. Then I just reloaded from like right before they killed me, and then just snuck around instead, and then like either threw like a rocket at them, or like in the case of Walter Simmons, I just snuck around him.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because if you do that, he actually shows up again later and tries to boss fight you again.
That's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but once again, I just snuck past him. So like, because both times I'd encountered the cutscene where he'd be like, and the second time he was like, "You got past me before, but not this time." Then I reloaded and just snuck past him. So both times he was just standing, because he's always standing, waiting for you to go to your objective, thinking he's going to be able to see you. And I just envisioned that he just stood there like for a very long time, and then later someone told him, "Oh hey, we just saw Denton in Paris, so he's probably not coming."
Yeah, you got to get him on a helicopter.
Yeah, we're in Human Revolution. Like all the bosses have a mandatory cutscene at the beginning to introduce them, and like in the cutscene, Adam Jensen, who's the protagonist in that game, always walks up to them to talk to them. So like you'd be like sneaking around like a vent. You'd pop out of a vent, you'd hide behind a box, you'd peek out of the box, and then trigger a cutscene where you walk up to a boss, have a conversation with them, and then you shoot each other.
Amazing.
And all the bosses almost exclusively had to be, well, they all had to be killed. You couldn't sneak past any boss. Like the doors would all lock in like an unlockable way, and or some other like excuse why you couldn't leave the room.
You were lowered into a pit.
Yeah, and then you had to kill them. You couldn't tase them, and none of them behaved like humans, where like if you just shot them in the head, they would die. They all had like these big HP bars.
Right. I think I like this a lot better. Yeah. I haven't played the new one, but I like being able to just sneak by Walter Simmons, and then later in the game, he's there and is pissed off at you.
Yeah. I think it's just like, I think the new game was sort of straddling some like different trends. So there's definitely like with the rising cost of game production, like in this game, I mean, I don't know, maybe it costs a lot more to do a lot less, but I feel like for them to write lines that no one will ever see was probably throwing less money away than it would be now, when every time someone talks, you have to have cinematographers configuring camera angles. You have to have animators like mocapping characters. You have to have voice actors and actresses and what have you, like voicing all the lines and like much higher quality, both in recording and like acting than this game had. So I think like if you're going to spend a whole bunch of time building this cutscene, I think there's more pressure on game developers to make sure to maximize the like dollar value of that cutscene, that like everyone sees it.
Yeah, there's I read an interview with Warren Spector, and I forget the developer he was talking to, but that was like a fighting point that they had come to when talking about his game, Deus Ex. He's saying that like it's crazy that you're creating a game where the average player will only ever see 60% of your content. Like that's ridiculous. And his perspective on it was like, no, like that's what makes the 60% of the content you're seeing so valuable is that there's 40% out there that could have happened differently, right? It's what makes the stuff that you did see feel special.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. And I think some games try to like almost like play on that by like pretending there's a 40% even when there isn't. Just
Right.
like that's like Telltale's like go-to strategy is like pretend the game could have been drastically different, and as long as the player never plays it twice, they feel really satisfied with all the things they did.
Right.
Then when they play it twice, they're like, "Oh, wow,
Oops.
yeah." But no, and I mean part of that was like the new Deus Ex. They actually were running on, I forget exactly what the restraint was, but they had to outsource all the boss fights to a different game studio. So the game studio just like made bosses and so they just got kind of shoved in the game.
Right.
So that was part of the problem. Supposedly they're going to fix that, but by and large, I would say that like despite a lot of the complaining, I think the new one is kind of like pretty similar to the original. You still got like you can sneak around and read emails forever that have nothing to do with you. You can. There's always like some like door you can unlock or like keypad you can hack or like 5 ways to go through the game kind of deal that this game had. There's a lot of sneaking. There's like hearing enemy banter. There's enemies who like you kind of don't feel that great about killing. There's a conspiracy involving like the Illuminati. So I don't know, I think they're pretty similar despite that. So I think if they can build on that for the next game, I think despite what people say that has been lost, I think the Deus Ex franchise is like modernizing this effectively.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear. I
Yeah.
haven't played any of the new ones, but I know that it's a franchise that's very near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. And I think that because of it, it has a science fiction, cyberpunk aesthetic. There's still a lot of valuable material for it to explore narratively as well as gameplay wise.
Yeah. Another boss thing that I found was like when Maggie Chow tries to kill you, um, she like runs up to you and then talks to you and then takes out a sword. But before she started talking to me, I already had my pistol out. So I just one-shot her in the head before she even got up to me.
Oh, Maggie, you have no honor, Brooke. You have no honor.
That was one thing that I did find kind of lacking in this game that is kind of more in newer games. Might just be because of budget. Is that like I found a lot of the characters didn't stick around or talk quite as much as I would have liked. Like I was kind of hoping, like with Maggie, like there was going to be a little more like character development that I was going to get into. But mostly she just tells you she's innocent. You go to a police station, find out she's not, and then she tries to kill you.
Right. So missed moments.
Yeah, that might have just been because budget in terms of like amount of recording they could do, or amount of writing they could do, or I don't know.
So thinking about the interim between when this thing came out in the year 2000 and today, we're talking in 2016. How well do you think the game has aged, and what do you think about it has not aged well?
I think aged well is the little hidden gems, the hidden choices, the fact that pretty much every choice you make is in gameplay. There's a lot of really neat stuff that games today aren't doing well. That this game did really well. Aged poorly.
This game is ugly.
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious cheap shots like the graphics.
But so I was talking about this with one of our lovely friendly friends on the internet, one of the 2-Bit Game Club members, so to speak. We're talking about like the differences in aesthetics choices in early low poly games, and the one contrast that we really came up with was Mario 64, where because of the aesthetic that it's going for, because it's not trying to actually look realistic, it doesn't have the burden of trying to lovingly render human hands with a single triangle or make a field of grass look like a field of grass.
Yeah.
So I'm not a visual artist, I'm a musician, so I don't actually know the solutions to these problems, But it feels to me that there were still games that are out in that era that were making aesthetic choices that did not leave them with like horribly disfigured, like conehead blob men shuffling around in environments that were kind of messy splotches of gray and brown.
Yeah, it was kind of before the time where like the kind of aesthetic they wanted was really available.
Yeah, it was not possible
Yeah.
what they wanted. They wanted it to look realistic,
Yeah, exactly.
and it was not going to.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And certainly expectations on how shooters work have changed. So I don't know if that's a property of aging well, because I was kind of mapping my experience with the game in terms of like the shooting part, and I like hated the game at the beginning, a lot. Like I couldn't tell, I didn't understand how any of the rules worked.
Right.
Like I unloaded like 15 trank darts into a guy, and he was still running around hitting alarm buttons. And I was just kind of yelling at the game, like asking what am I supposed to do? Like what do you like? How does any of this work? Or like sometimes the prod charger would take like 4 hits to knock someone out. Sometimes it would take one, and like sometimes like I remember my arm was injured and I didn't understand that was related to my aiming, so I couldn't hit anything. And I also initially found like stealth to be impossible just because I'm used to the new like third person like sticky cover thing,
Right.
where you kind of like see. It's kind of unrealistic, but like you can go up to the edge of a wall and you can see into the room even though your character can't see it. Where in this game, when you're stealthing around, you're looking at a box and you have no idea what's going on outside the box except for like trying to parse the limited like 3D sound quality to see where footsteps are.
Yeah.
But by and large, you're like staring at a box and kind of like hoping.
Mm-hmm.
But then like as I started to play it, I started to get a sense for like the time, a lot of what the game was going to kind of making easy for me. Like enemies, even if you're in the light, enemies will take a very long time to notice that something is going on.
Right.
Like you'll walk in front of someone and they'll be like, "What's that?" And then another second will go by and they'll be like, "Hey, there's a guy in a trench coat here."
It's probably just some kind of homeless guy.
But yeah, so like it kind of, the enemies are kind of dumb in terms of what they can see and how long they'll look for you. So even though like it doesn't have like a lot of the ease of like a modern stealth game in terms of like just the fluidness of motion, the enemies seem to be made like proportionally dumb to compensate.
Yeah.
Because real JC Denton acting like I did would never be able to break in anywhere.
No, and I think that of all the game systems, that's perhaps the one that's most game-like.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't really feel like you were actually like an agent sneaking around. It felt like you were just like, I don't even know. I don't know what the analogy here is, but you're just like popping in and out of boxes and you're staring at people who are like kind of cocking their head at you and then just ducking and then they just kind of shrug.
Yeah.
But so in terms of aging, I'm not sure. I guess it depends on what we mean by aging, because aging could mean that like it's actually bad. We just thought it was good at the time because there was nothing better. Or it could mean that like the conventions have shifted. Like the conventions of how a stealth game and a shooting game plays are very different now. So when I played this game, I was very bad at it. But by the end, I was very good at it. Just 'cause I learned how all the game system would work and like where it would let me get away with things and where it wouldn't.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. Do you think that's aging, or what do you think?
Yeah,
what do you think of that?
I think for me, a game aging well means that if it were to come out today, it would still have meaningful things to contribute. So, I mean, we're talking about graphics. If we have a developer who's trying to make movements towards like photorealism and whatnot, that's always going to be a stepping point, right? Like a sticking point. If you're going with an artistic style that's more stylized and cartoony, or not trying to be like a video of people running around, you're going to get some free points there for sure. So maybe that's a side pot. But I would say in general that like if this was a game that was brand new, and we're not gonna worry about whether or not it was had like the firsts of anything, and it just had to stand toe to toe with games that were coming out today. How well would it do?
Yeah, probably pretty poorly just because of the graphics.
Yeah, let's put the graphics aside. We've already agreed that the game looks kind of muddy.
Yeah, I think it would be tricky for a lot of people just because the systems work so differently than like a contemporary like FPS RPG. Like,
or do they work badly? Do they work badly? Were they not fun?
I think they were fun.
Yeah, I think so too, Brooke.
I agree that they're fun, but I did have to force. I feel like there would be very little. If we're talking about like actually it being in the market, I feel like there would be very little patience for like it operating so differently from convention in ways that it's like not clear why. But I think that why is reload semicolon?
Yeah, make it R.
I mean, I can remap it, but
yeah.
I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but
no, I hear
the world has shifted underneath it. So I think it's hard to say. It might not be bad, but it would be out of touch with like what's considered a good shooter now, right. And it wouldn't be clear why this game was doing the things that it's doing the way it was. Well, the reason it's doing them is just because, well, partly because convention at the time, and just because, I don't know, just figuring out how to even make this kind of game, because I don't think anyone else was making this kind of game.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's do high point and low point. What was the high point of the game for you?
The highest point of the game was... Well, I'll say my low point first. Low point was the final boss. Right. By far. I actually turned on God mode to beat it. I couldn't do it.
Who did you fight as the final boss?
I did the Illuminati ending because I didn't want to throw away the world. But yeah, on the one hand, I appreciate the design of the final boss where it had like every kind of enemy it faced was there. Every kind of tool you could possibly use was represented. It literally was a room with every mechanic of the game put into it. So if you were good at the game, theoretically you'd be good at this. But on the other hand, it had every enemy that I found annoying as fuck. It was a maze with no map, and I had no tools left by that game. No lockpicks, no multi-tools. And I didn't have any more like health packs or bioelectric cells.
Right.
So that was a low point for me.
Oh yeah. For me, the low point I would say is the sound design of this game.
Right.
I think it's really lame. All the guns sound like dinky cartoons, and while all like the voiceovers sound really nice and rich, whenever like you shoot somebody, I don't know what the direction they were given in the recording booth, but they howl like maniacs or like make like blah, 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 blah.
Oh yeah, every time JC Denton dies, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But they always last it lasts forever, and nobody's ever yelled like that. But everybody in this game yells like that. And the guns go like pew 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 or Ricky Dicky 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 Dicky. It just like you're a cool guy, you're augmented, you just gave yourself like super legs so you can jump really high, and then you're gonna sneak up behind a guy and shoot him, and then your gun goes skaboop and he goes and for me it's like you get over it, right? Like you just learn to not hear it.
Yeah.
But for me, that the sound design is comically bad in a game where the rest of it is so good.
Yeah, I would say my high point then would be one of the many occasions where like I somehow managed to use because the game very rarely gives you like a big shop, like a normal RPG shop where you just buy wherever you want. You just kind of most of the game you just have whatever you have. But some of the times when like I think there was one time where I went back to Maggie Chow's apartment, her maid was there and said she's out, and I said I know she's evil, and then she called for the guards, and the whole room flooded with people, and without having to ever like reload from dying, like I managed to or pause or anything. I pulled out smoke grenades. I smoked the entire apartment, and then I systematically went up to every person with a pistol and shot them and took no damage. And that was
cool.
That was a high point for me.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, so like those discovered gameplay moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it works.
Yeah, exactly. With just whatever random shit you had on you, and it just all goes wonderfully.
Yeah. The thing that I like the most about the game is figuring out which characters that seem integral to the plot the game actually lets you kill. And oftentimes very early in the game.
What happens if you just if you're meeting Stanton Dow in his memorial, and you just shoot him in the head?
He just dies. A lot of times you end up with situations where you can't make it out of that area because you end up being killed by a non-stop flood of enemies or whatnot.
Yeah.
But they let you kill him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So ostensibly that could be the end of the story, right? And then, JC Denton, after clearing out the Statue of Liberty, walks into UNATCO headquarters and kills,
manually.
Kills manually, and they'll let you kill him, right? You'll never make it out of UNATCO headquarters alive. But for you, it can be a 3-hour game, right?
Yeah. That's interesting because a lot of people wouldn't consider that to be a real end of the game. And
your character dying?
yeah. Which is interesting. And I won't go into this too much now because I think it's kind of a big thing, but I wonder how much of that is up to framing. Because one of them says the end and it shows your dead body.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't even say the end. And then another one is an ending cutscene.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wonder what would happen if games just had cutscenes for every bunch of just random shit you could do to end the game early. And it's just that's the end. Here's your cutscene.
Well, a game that's kind of like that comes to mind is Chrono Trigger. I don't know if you've played it, but
never have.
Right at the very beginning of the game, you're supposed to step into teleporter A instead of teleporter B. But you can just go into teleporter B, and you go right to the boss of the game, who creams you in one hit. And then it's game over! And then the credits roll.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is cool. And I didn't even know, that terrorist leader that, you meet on the plane. I didn't know that you could not kill him.
Yeah,
or
you don't have to.
Anna Navarra, I didn't shoot him, but Anna Navarra did.
Right.
I didn't know you could kill her. I tried, but she was very...
She's tough.
Yeah.
She's a tough old broad.
So I kind of just assumed that they weren't going to let me kill her. But yeah, I guess the game is kind of designed so that even if you do those things, it just switches the allegiances of enemies for the next couple levels, and everything kind of just rides out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you very early in the game hit a point where you've gone AWOL and you're sort of acting on your own.
Yeah, so all I would have to do is just switch the allegiances of people for the levels where you didn't go AWOL earlier. And, you kill Anna Navarra one way or another. You go against UNATCO one way or another. It's just a matter of when. It's interesting. Yeah, yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think it's pretty neat. That's my favorite part. All right, Brooke. I think this has been a pretty good unpacking of Deus Ex.
Yeah, I was surprised how much I liked it, considering how much I hated the beginning, so...
Yeah. I had to admit that watching through your Let's Plays, at the first couple, I was like, oh no. What have I done to Brooke? You gotta get through 30 hours of this thing.
Yeah, it was surprising how quickly I just got kind of good at it. It was just clearing out areas relatively quickly. But yeah, it's good. Good time. I like it.
That's lovely. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then afterwards we're going to talk a little bit about Banjo-Kazooie, the third game of the 2-Bit Game Club.
Wonderful.
So, Brooke, I understand that you know little to nothing about Banjo-Kazooie.
But besides that there's probably 2 characters called Banjo and Kazooie.
This interests me because you're the one who picked this game.
Did I?
I gave you a list of like 12 things, and you picked this from it.
I probably picked it because I had heard the name, and my conception of it was that it would be different. Because
Yes.
I have it in my head. It's probably a game where, like, a third-person adventure game
You're right so far.
with like probably like jumping.
Yeah, people jump.
But that's not based on me knowing Banjo-Kazooie is. That's based on, like, I know there are other games that have similar sounding names, like Crash Bandicoot, and
or Ratchet and Clank.
Or Jack and Dexter, which I have some idea of what they are, and their names sound equally ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm under the impression they're in the same time of release. So that's what I think.
Out in 1998 for the N64.
Yeah.
That's the controller that's shaped like an M that Nintendo made. And it's a 3D adventure game where you are playing as Banjo, who is a bear, and Kazooie, who is a bird who lives in Banjo's backpack. And you are traveling the world trying to collect Jinjos, music notes, Mumbo tokens, puzzle pieces, red and gold feathers, honeycombs, in order to save Banjo's sister in a plot that is as far from Deus Ex as possibly could be. So instead of deciding whether the world is going to tumble into anarchy or to, reach an enlightened despotic totalitarianism, the witch Gruntilda has captured Tootie the bear and has made her ugly. That's the plot.
Okay.
And that's the next game we're doing on the 2-Hit Game Club.
Wonderful. All right, well, I'll look forward to that.
All right. So thanks so much for listening. If you want to find us on the web, we're 2-Bit Game Club at most places. That's on Twitch and Facebook. And theliamgallagher.com/2-Bit Game Club. Twitter, it's at 2-Bit Game Club. I've been Liam Gallagher.
And I'm Brooke Jensen.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye.